Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Bio, the podcast. My name is Wendee Lee Curtis. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a professional host, MC, and moderator for multinational Fortune 500 companies. Additionally, I offer a Broadway keynote called Building Community Through Broadway. I am honored and excited to be sitting down in conversation and community with our next guest. Our next guest, Abeo, and their pronouns are they, them, is a mental health advocate, speaker, podcast host, producer, and photographer and creator of the Faces of Fortitude project. The project began as a series of portraits documenting the healing of those affected by suicide. In just 5 years, it has grown into a body of work that consists of 2 TEDx and other public speaking events, traveling gallery exhibits, the Behind the Lens podcast, one-on-one portrait sessions, and 2 upcoming books. Travels the country and the world talking about the healing they discovered within their portrait work and their love for plants as a form of self-care, and how combining the lessons of them both has unearthed a new method of self-healing that can be used as superfood if we let it. A trigger warning to our attendees: there will be discussions around suicide and suicidal ideation. So please welcome to Beyond the Bio, the podcast, our guest, Abeo. Hi,
Hello, thank you so much for that wonderful intro. It's really nice to see you again.
I know we went down the rabbit hole the last time we were on Zoom.
We did. It was nice though. It was nice.
15 minutes and ended up being closer to 30. We have a lot in common. There were a lot of our conversation centered around the revelations post-pandemic. I know that there are people that are probably rolling their eyes and shrugging their shoulders saying, oh my gosh, we've been talking about post, but the revelations aren't the same for everyone.
No.
And the revelations that you've had in the pandemic and post-pandemic are particularly poignant. Can you walk us through some of that?
Yeah, first of all, I think it bears to mention that we're all experiencing a unprecedented level of grief and or loss during just quarantine. I'm not even accounting for everything else in our own stories and our own backgrounds and our own heritages that we're dealing with that kind of loss and grief. This is an additional loss and grief. And so I think so many of us built up over the years a need, especially if you're over the age of 30, a need to always be working, always be hustling, always have something on the burner, always be doing better. And COVID forced us all to do what? Stop. And all those plates we were spinning fell for so many of us. And we really started to realize that in the quiet moments, there were things that we were not dealing with. And so I think what I realized and what I'm seeing with everyone is that everyone is realizing that they had stuff to work on. And in starting to work on that, they started to change their lives, whether they started therapy for the first time, whether they started using boundaries for the first time, which shockingly, I've heard so much from people in my generation, the X gens, that they weren't taught boundaries growing up, but now they're learning them in their 30s and 40s and 50s. And I am learning, and through my work, I'm learning that we need to give a lot of very special care and patience and kindness to people right now. We are all at our breaking points. And so taking an extra second to talk to people really lets you realize we all have our own struggles. We all have our own grief. We are all going through this together. Mm-hmm. And I realized that I was using social media. I was using just scrolling in general on the internet, finding things. I was doing things to avoid what was coming up in the quiet moments. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. In our initial conversation, the thing when we hung up, this happened post you and I on camera, that came up for me was the tapestry of that period of time, your identity and your lived experience was so poignant to me. I don't know that people who are living their truth, maybe they do know the permission that they give other people to step more fully into the things that they've kept quiet, the things that they've pushed to the margins, for the sake of keeping the peace.
Mm.
I would love for you to share with our listeners a little about the tapestry of what's been happening with you around the nexus of identity, um, familial situations, and the pandemic. Walk us through that a little.
Of course. I think growing up in a Roman Catholic Italian family, really conservative family, I think I had my own, I know I have my own childhood abuse and my own childhood trauma around those things that as a young parent, which you and I very much are the same, we have children the same age. Um, when I was a young parent, I grew up with my child. So it was either deal with my mommy issues or be a mommy. I couldn't do both. And so I opted to be a mommy and shut myself off. I thought I was handling things great. And looking back, I have so much respect for her, for that young version of me that really had no manual, had no business, making decisions around what she was doing, but she did it. And we made this amazing human being who's a rock star now. I am looking at the trajectory, and as things started to slow down, I started to wake up to things that society and the patriarchy has taught us, that if you are socialized a woman, you just settle for those things. You are lucky if someone wants to marry you. You are lucky if your desires and pleasures are being fulfilled. You are lucky if you get a good job with health insurance. Like, all of these things were taught that it was a privilege, when in reality they are a right. And so as I started making room for those things, and then quarantine happened, I was in the middle of, being separated and then divorced for the first time ever in my life. I was living by myself for the first time in 20 plus years. I had solitude, I had loneliness, I had sadness, and I didn't know what to do. And I started to really discover who I was underneath all of those things that society told me I needed to be. And I came out as transgender at the very beginning of the quarantine. And it was because I started seeing people in society, older, using words to describe what they were feeling around their gender. As somebody who grew up with it, you were either gay or you weren't. And I always knew I was bisexual growing up, but I didn't know anything else. We didn't have definitions like we do now. So as they started to come out, I was like, I remember the first time I really kind of was wrapping my head around it, probably 7, 8 years ago. It was very much well, wouldn't that have been nice if I would have known in my teens and 20s, but it's too late for me now. And then I started seeing people coming out later in their life and realizing that it was so helpful to their mental health. And I really, I worked in this industry, so I thought my mental health's fine. And then I started seeing the first hint was the decline of my plants. And I didn't realize they were connected to me in the way that they were until I kind of unpacked it a lot later. But as I started to make these gender and personal, basically light bulbs in my life, as they started happening, I realized that I was also creating more space within myself to start dealing with those mommy issues and those traumas from growing up. And your body is an amazing thing. And when you create space, those memories start to come back and those feelings start to come back because you're in a better place to deal with them. So that's kind of been my trajectory in a Cliff Notes version. But I really have started seeing myself in the world, in other people, in older trans and queer people starting to say F the standards and F what I was told, this is how I feel. And this makes me feel good. And, both my clinician and my therapist have said that mentally, my mental health, regardless, my physical health is better than it's ever been. But mentally, it has taken me leaps and bounds just to be able to wrap my head around things and feel things a little better and more authentically.
You're modeling something so powerful for your daughter. I'm going to brag on their daughter for a second. Portland Ballet. We have the
Oh,
creative.
Seattle. Pacific
Oh my
Northwest
gosh.
Ballet.
Yeah, Seattle Ballet, correct. I knew it was a ballet company in the Pacific Northwest. I was close. But yes, we have that creative connection. But what you're modeling, you know, I want to dive into this idea of grace because we touched on it a little bit around if I'd only I trust the timing of my life.
Mm.
I trust the timing of my life. I trust that things come to me in their perfect time. You're in my
I
life at the
I
perfect
trust that.
time. That revelation that you had around the synergy, the metaphor between plants and your own evolution and iteration came at the perfect time. And I looked it up because I'm such a nerd. A plant lover is called an anthophile. I'm a
Oh, thank you.
I'm a fellow anthophile. I took a horticulture course at UCLA because
Wow.
I was unintentionally unaliving every plant in my home. But I love you touched on it. I love that metaphoric link that you're drawing between self-care, self-realization, and caring for your plants. What would you say are the implications of drawing on foliage to highlight the importance of self-care?
I think let me just draw a new kind of statement around this because I think self-care is very misused right now and it's very, very overused. And I don't think the care of my plants and the connection is actually self-care. I think it's actually self-preservation in a lot of ways. I I was in the height of kind of being on the internet and there was a lot of followers and my ego was being very filled and I was bragging about these plants and not really looking at them the way I used to because I was too busy. I had too many things going on. And then one day I saw spider mites on like half of them and my most favorite plants. And after looking it up, I went and got oils. My most favorite plant I had to cut all the way down and I like gave her oils. She had a schedule. I found myself out loud saying, I can't believe this happened. You have a schedule. I'm going to pay more attention to you. I'm so sorry this happened. Wendee, when I tell you that I stood back for a moment and just went, oh, that plant was $15.99 at Fred Meyer. And that plant is getting more attention, more validation, and more help getting better than I was. What if, and it's so easy for me to take care of my plants. So why can't I use those steps for myself? And this all happened retrospectively. This all happened when my therapist of now 9 years decided to have a baby during the quarantine. Like, I'm not going to need her or something. And I know that's facetious and funny, but it was true. It was like all of these years of work, and then she's going to go have a baby. And all of a sudden I'm getting divorced. I'm living by myself for the first time. It was terrifying, terrifying. But my plants, I like to say, kind of built this little forest in the middle of the city around me to protect me because I had months of loneliness and sadness and regression, building blanket forts with myself and watching drag queens and eating candy. And I was like, I needed that. I needed to heal that small child that was afraid and scared. And my plants were there to really help me. So I thought, what would happen if I started self care or just caring for myself or unpacking big feelings like I do my plants? What does that look like? So I wrote it down one day. I wrote down the steps that I take with my plants to make sure they're okay, to see what they need. And they were so easy. So I decided to start doing it with myself. And when I tell you that I use it every day, I am not lying. It's very helpful for me to take things in small bites because our bodies are made to tell us when something's wrong. But I think where people tend to over ask themselves is when they're like, okay, I know this is an issue. I got mommy issues or I got daddy issues or this horrible trauma happened to me. Here's safety. I'm going to vomit it all. And here we go. And I'm going to deal with all of it. And it's so hard on ourselves. And it doesn't give ourselves grace. And then we have this negative self-talk when we're not productive or when it takes us to a dark place. And I think I've learned that every single reaction and thing in our bodies is telling us something. It's like a blueprint to how we can take care of ourselves in that moment. And I think, if anything, over this quarantine, I've learned to listen to, you called it a trigger warning. I'm calling them blooms, because I feel like they are very, very beautiful. We are taught to use negative words and to say, I'm very triggered. Don't talk about this. This is very hard on me.
Yes.
But why don't we talk about why your body is telling you this, and praise yourself for knowing when you've had enough, for knowing when you need a break? Just reframing it. I'm not saying keep going with the conversation. Take that break. Do that for yourself, but also give yourself the narrative around it that's kind and that's going to help you grow. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of
I feel
sense.
like I babble sometimes.
Well,
Sorry.
the avoidance is there. I think we talked about this earlier. It can be so difficult to talk about the issues that bring us to our knees, that are the progenitors of what we believe are pain. Um, Growing up, there was a saying that I started in my own household that I'm actually looking to sort of recalibrate, which was, you can't fix what you won't face. Alliteration has me in a chokehold. I don't know what to say, but I don't like the word fix. I don't like the connotation of it.
Mm.
So I'm working around something else with it. But processes around loss, um, I don't know that they fully support us in meaningful ways, but I think it's important. You've dedicated a tremendous amount of resources, emotional, spiritual, mental resources to this topic. Faces of Fortitude. This project you began in October of 2017. Just so our audience knows, in an effort to create and encourage cross-trauma sharing and healing within the suicide loss and attempt and first responder communities, you created Forces of Fortitude. And these are beautiful portraits that have captured moments of immense grief and loss, as well as rays of light and discoveries of hope that once were feared would never return. Talk to us a little bit about Faces of Fortitude and where we can see it, how we can spend time in that space.
So I'm a trained producer, like you said at the beginning, and I was working at a production company as a producer, and a woman came in to give a talk for an event we were having, and she was a photographer and she was a wounded war vet, and she had started a project called Veterans Portrait Project, and she basically started in the VA hospital when she was wounded, taking photos of wounded war vets. And she talked about how using creativity to create a project or something to help yourself heal can also help other people heal. And so I had become her friend. I was her line producer at that time, and helping her with students and things. And we had talked after, and I was kind of like, I had a light bulb, and I was like, maybe I could do this. And I had a 10-year-old Nikon in the closet. I recently just updated that, by the way. I was using a really old camera that was gifted to me. It was 10 years old in 2017, to be clear. So it's even older now. And I didn't know how to, I was a mom that took pictures of their daughter. You know what I mean? I wasn't a photographer. And so I decided I was going to try it. And she looked at me and said, "This is important. This space is needed. You should do it." And then immediately the imposter syndrome came up, and I was like, my camera's old. I don't know how to light. I don't have space. And she looked right at me and she goes, "Sounds like you got a lot of excuses."
Yes.
And I was like, ooh, like I was definitely Homer in the bush, like, disappearing. And I felt as though I wasn't prepared to be in this space, but I tried it. So I was at a studio, I was a producer. So I had studio space thankfully they let me use it, very kind, Creative Live, and Chase Jarvis is my mentor in many ways as a photographer. And I sat by myself in a studio for 2 hours, and I had my camera on a tripod and I had a remote, and I sat in front of that camera and I said the words that were inside of my head about my experience, about my story out loud to myself, because I was trying to capture my emotions during my story, because that's my work. Is I want to show people what grief looks like at different stages, because we're all at different places. And I got it after about 2 hours. I got the shot. And this was at a time in my life that I hated photos of myself. I was very insecure. I had no self esteem. And so it was hard. It was really emotionally hard for me. And I ended up getting the shot and I put it on Instagram with my story, and it exploded. And people were in my inbox immediately, share my story. I want you to take my picture. And I was like, whoa, it exploded very quickly. And I quickly realized I needed to get better. So I took a few YouTube classes and taught myself how to take photos. I taught myself how to edit, and I taught myself how to do social media and marketing. And it went on. It flew. Um, and then it started to get really serious and really heavy really quickly. I had to put some boundaries in. But what I realized is, whether you're grieving 5 years ago or 35 years, which I've photographed all of the in between, I have the same, everyone comes in the same way. I'm so nervous. I don't know if I'm going to have anything to share. I don't know if I'll show the right emotions that you want. And every session is the same. I sit and I share my story first, because I think what people aren't realizing about trauma and our healing generation, and we're in our healing era right now, is what people would say probably, is that people are much more likely to feel safe with you and share with you if they know that you can go to those places too. And so I always share first. And what that has brought me in my photography is a lot of people that have trusted my space with the most painful moments in their life. And I cherish that. It's The project has taught me that there is so much light in death.
Wow. I often say that great teachers are often great students, and you are a great teacher. It is clearly your calling. In 10 words or less, what would you say that you've learned that's had the most impact?
What have I learned that's had the most impact? The power of the human spirit is unfathomable. That's what I've learned. I have heard stories from people across from that camera that will break your heart into a million pieces. I've heard quotes, because I gather quotes for my work, that society or people watching or looking at the stories. And you asked where you could find it on Instagram and the website currently right now, or at a location near you if you're doing an exhibit. And what I realize is that people that have gone through all of these things are taught, and most of the time focus on being victims and being left behind and being survivors of loss. But I just love to use the word survivors with them, and warriors, because I chose the word fortitude on purpose, to have courage in pain or adversity. I picture like a Viking coming up from a battle with like blood and just battered, but muscles and dust coming off them and just ready to go again. And the stories that I've heard, I always will look at someone after hearing the entirety of their story and feel so much gratitude for the fact that they've shared this level of fortitude with me, because it shows me. I always look at them and say, you realize you got up today, you're holding a job, you're an amazing parent, you have not you're doing so much more than some people would expect you to be doing for what you've gone through. So you should be proud of yourself. And I think of most people kind of sit back and having that perspective. If you tell me something horrible that happened to you, Wendee, I think the best gift I can give you is being authentic in my response, so that you can feel your trauma through me. So I urge people in my talks and in my workshops to not worry about making someone feel better. When I tell somebody I lost my brother, their first response is, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I don't know why my reaction is, "It's okay." Why am I making them feel better for my loss? We need to learn to be able to be in that discomfort with people. Just sit with it and go, "This was a horrible story. I can't believe you went through that. That must have been so, so painful." Or when people tell me stories and I'm shocked while they're talking, covering my mouth, putting my hands on my heart, I will often cry with people. And what that tells them is, you're, you're reacting like I reacted. That this was hard. This was hard, and you saw it, and you're seeing it. And that means I'm valid. We don't do that. So often we just go, "That was hard, but they're in a better place now." Or, "That was hard, but God, can you imagine still struggling with that?" And we can't give those qualifiers anymore. We just have to let people sit. We're learning to sit in things now. Discomfort is the new multivitamin. Like I said, it is. Once I unlocked that, now I'm like, get me uncomfortable a few times a day, please.
Growth. Emma Bale, keep shining your light. Keep shining your light. We need your voice in the middle of this conversation, learning how to sit in the discomfort. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you've not already, you're on Instagram, correct? Also on
Mhm.
LinkedIn, you can be found there. Um, Faces of Fortitude on display. I believe there's a link also on your Instagram where people can find
Yes.
out what's happening. Check that out. I receive everything that you said today, and I appreciate you so tremendously for sharing your truth and your hard won learnings with all of us.
Mm.
Thank
Thank you for having me. You're a delight. I can't wait for us to connect in real life.
It's coming. It's happening.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you.